The buzzing of clippers filled the small-town barbershop, intermingling with the gentle murmur of conversations. Amidst the hum, Sarah Lawson, a compassionate hairstylist, offered a warm smile to an elderly veteran seated in her chair, his frail hands clutching a worn cap. "This one's on the house," she said softly. Little did she know, this simple act of kindness would ignite a whirlwind of conflict, leading to her unjust dismissal and a surprising twist of fate. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the quaint town of Maplewood, where the leaves danced in the gentle breeze, creating a mosaic of gold and crimson across the cobblestone streets. Nestled among the charming shops and cafes was the Snip Clip, a small barbershop with a cheerful red and white pole spinning lazily by the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was a comforting blend of familiar voices and the rhythmic hum of clippers, a place where stories were shared as readily as hair was styled. Sarah Lawson, a spirited and talented hairstylist in her late 20s, had made this shop her second home. Her station, with its neatly organized tools and a small pot of daisies, reflected her vibrant personality. With a pair of scissors in hand, she moved with practiced ease, her fingers dancing expertly through the hair of a longtime client. Her laughter was infectious, a melodic sound that filled the room, drawing smiles from those around her. Raised in Maplewood, Sarah was a product of her environment, nurtured by a community that valued kindness and camaraderie. Her mother, a dedicated nurse, often spoke of the importance of helping others, especially those who had given so much for their country. These lessons were etched into Sarah's heart, guiding her actions and interactions with everyone she met. "Looks like you've got a full house today, Sarah," remarked Mrs. Jenkins, a regular known for her penchant for gossip and her perfectly coiffed curls. Sarah grinned, adjusting a section of hair with precision. "Just the way I like it, Mrs. Jenkins. Keeps me on my toes and out of trouble." "Well, you're the only one brave enough to tame this wild mane," Mrs. Jenkins quipped, gesturing to her hair with a wink. As Sarah finished up, she caught sight of Mr. Grayson, her boss, hovering near the cash register. A tall man with graying hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, Mr. Grayson was a businessman through and through. While he appreciated Sarah's skills and the clientele she brought in, his focus was always on the bottom line. The tension between his profit-driven mindset and Sarah's more altruistic approach often simmered beneath the surface, though they'd managed to coexist without incident until now. The day continued at its usual pace, with customers flowing in and out, each bringing their own stories and energy. Sarah relished these interactions, finding joy in the small connections she made with each person who sat in her chair. Her coworkers often marveled at her ability to remember details about everyone's lives, from birthdays to favorite vacation spots. "Sarah, you've got a memory like a steel trap," her colleague Mark often said, shaking his head in admiration as he swept the floor. "It's easy when you care about people, Mark," she'd reply with a shrug and a smile. But as the afternoon wore on, Sarah noticed a figure hesitantly lingering outside the shop's window. The man was elderly, his posture slightly stooped, and his clothes spoke of years of wear. There was something in his eyes, a mix of pride and weariness, that tugged at Sarah's heart. Without a second thought, she set down her tools and approached the door. A gentle bell chimed as she stepped outside, the crisp air a stark contrast to the warmth inside. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked, her voice kind and inviting. The man hesitated, his gaze flickering to the sign listing the shop's prices. I was just looking," he replied, his voice rough yet grateful. Sarah recognized the quiet dignity in his demeanor, a trait often seen in those who had served. Her thoughts drifted to the stories her mother had shared about the veterans she cared for, men and women who had given so much and asked for so little in return. "Please come in," she urged gently. "It's chilly out here, and I'd be honored to give you a haircut. No charge." The man's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and gratitude. "I couldn't possibly," he began. "Nonsense," Sarah interrupted with a wave of her hand. "Consider it a thank you for your service." After a moment's pause, the man nodded, allowing himself to be led inside. The warmth of the shop enveloped them, and Sarah guided him to her chair, offering a reassuring smile as she draped a cape around his shoulders. As she worked, they exchanged stories, the clippers and scissors creating a soothing soundtrack to their conversation. He spoke of his days in the service, painting vivid pictures of distant lands and battles fought. In return, Sarah shared tales of her mother's work and her own love for the community. Their conversation flowed easily, an unexpected friendship blossoming in the span of a haircut. It was a reminder of the power of human connection, of the simple acts of kindness that could bridge even the widest of divides. Unbeknownst to them, however, Mr. Grayson had been observing the scene, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. As Sarah finished the haircut and brushed away the stray clippings, Mr. Grayson approached, his footsteps heavy with purpose. "Sarah, a word," he said curtly, nodding towards the back of the shop. Puzzled, Sarah excused herself and followed him, her heart sinking at the stern set of his jaw. She knew this wasn't a conversation she was going to enjoy, but she steeled herself, determined to stand by her actions. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mr. Grayson began, his voice low but edged with anger. "Giving away free services is against company policy. You're here to work, not to play the saint." Sarah met his gaze, her own eyes unwavering. "Mr. Grayson, he's a veteran. He's given more to this country than I ever could. A haircut is the least I could do." Mr. Grayson's expression remained hard, unmoved by her reasoning. "Rules are rules, Sarah, and you've broken them." The words hung heavy in the air, an ultimatum she hadn't anticipated. Her mind raced, a flurry of emotions battling for dominance, disbelief, frustration, but above all, a steadfast conviction that she had done the right thing. "I'm sorry, but I can't let this go unpunished," Mr. Wang. Grayson continued, his tone final. "You're fired, effective immediately." The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the weight of his words crashing down on her like a tidal wave. Fired. The reality of it was almost too much to comprehend. She felt the eyes of her colleagues on her, a mix of sympathy and shock mirrored in their expressions. Nodding numbly, Sarah returned to her station, her hands shaking slightly as she gathered her personal items. The vibrant room that had once been her sanctuary now felt oppressive, the walls closing in around her. As she walked towards the door, the whispers of those who had witnessed the scene followed her, a chorus of disbelief and speculation. With one last glance at the shop, Sarah stepped outside, the cold air a stark reminder of the uncertainty she now faced. But beneath the shock and sadness, a spark of defiance flickered within her. She had stood by her values, and though the cost had been high, she knew she wouldn't have done anything differently. And so, with her head held high, Sarah walked away from the Snip N Clip, unaware of the extraordinary turn her life was about to take. One chilly afternoon, the kind that signaled the arrival of winter with its biting winds and overcast skies, Sarah Lawson was busy sweeping up the hair clippings scattered across the floor of the Snip N Clip. The rhythmic swishing of the broom was punctuated by the gentle hum of conversation from the few customers seated in the worn-out leather chairs. The shop was a familiar haven, filled with the comforting scent of aftershave and the lingering warmth of camaraderie. As she worked, Sarah's gaze drifted to the large glass window at the front of the shop. There, she noticed a frail, elderly man standing hesitantly outside. His clothes were worn and threadbare, a muted palette of grays and browns that seemed to blend with the dreary day. His eyes, however, were a vivid reflection of a life lived long and hard, holding stories of battles fought and memories cherished. Sarah's heart ached at the sight, recognizing him as a veteran from the tales her mother often shared. Without a second thought, she set her broom aside and approached the door, her breath fogging up the glass as she pushed it open. The jingle of the bell above the door announced her presence. "Hello there," Sarah greeted warmly, her voice cutting through the chilly air. "Would you like to come in for a haircut? Don't worry about the cost, it's on me." The elderly man hesitated, his worn cap in hand, eyes scanning the floor as if searching for an answer. I don't want to be a bother," he stammered, his voice a gravelly whisper colored with gratitude and pride. "Nonsense," Sarah insisted, gently guiding him inside. "It's been a slow day, and I could use the company." As the man settled into the chair, Sarah draped a cape around his shoulders and began her work, the scissors whispering through his silver strands. They talked quietly, sharing snippets of their lives. The man, whose name was Walter, recounted stories of his time in the service, painting vivid pictures of camaraderie and sacrifice. In turn, Sarah spoke of her upbringing, her mother's dedication to helping veterans, and her own desire to carry on that legacy of kindness. Their conversation was a tapestry of shared humanity, each word binding them in an unspoken understanding. But just as Sarah was finishing up, the atmosphere shifted. Mr. Grayson, the owner of the shop, appeared from the back room, his expression a storm cloud of disapproval. "Sarah," he barked, cutting through the warmth with his cold, authoritative tone. "Can I have a word?" Sarah's heart sank, but she nodded, stepping aside as Mr. Grayson approached. His voice dropped to a low, harsh whisper, yet it felt as loud as a thunderclap in the confines of the small shop. "I overheard your little arrangement. You know the rules. No freebies." "But Mr. Grayson, he's a veteran. I don't care if he's the president. Business is business, and you've crossed the line." His eyes were steely, his decision final. "You're fired, effective immediately." The words hit Sarah like a gust of icy wind, leaving her stunned. Walter looked on, his eyes full of regret and apology. But Sarah, regaining her composure, managed a small, reassuring smile for him. "It's okay," she whispered, trying to believe it herself. Gathering her belongings with trembling hands, Sarah stepped out into the cold once more, the weight of her dismissal pressing heavily on her shoulders. The world felt different now, uncertain and daunting, as she walked away from the shop that had been her home for so long. But in her heart, a flicker of resolve began to glow, preparing her for the trials to come. As the cold wind bit through her thin jacket, Sarah stood outside, the Snip N Clip, clutching a small box filled with her personal belongings. It felt surreal. Only moments ago, she had been surrounded by the familiar hum of clippers and warm chatter, and now the world felt unnervingly silent. The sky was overcast, a dull gray that mirrored the heaviness in her heart. She took a deep breath, her mind replaying the confrontation with Mr. Grayson. His words had been harsh, cutting through the warmth of her good intentions like a cold blade. "This is a business, Sarah," he had snapped, his face flushed with anger. "We can't just give away free services. You've left me no choice but to let you go." The veteran, still seated in the chair, had tried to intervene. "It was my fault," he stammered, his voice frail but earnest. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." But Mr. Grayson had been unmoved, his eyes hard and unyielding. And so, Sarah found herself on the sidewalk, her future as uncertain as the shifting clouds above. As she trudged down the main street, the whispers began to follow her. News of her firing spread quickly through the small town, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. She could feel eyes on her, some filled with sympathy, others with judgment. The weight of their stares added to her burden, each glance a reminder of how drastically her life had changed in a matter of minutes. When she passed by the bakery, old Mrs. Jenkins, who had been a regular at the shop, called out to her from the doorway. "Sarah, dear, I heard what happened," she said, her voice a mix of concern and indignation. "It's a shame, it really is. That man has no heart." Sarah offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. I couldn't let him walk away without helping." The baker nodded, her eyes softening. "You did what was right, love. Don't let anyone tell you differently." Sarah's heart swelled with a flicker of hope at the support, enough to carry her a few more steps down the road. But the reality of her situation loomed large, casting a shadow over her thoughts. Her rent was due in 2 weeks, and without a steady income, she couldn't see a way forward. Her savings were meager, barely enough to scrape by for a month. Lost in her thoughts, she almost didn't hear the familiar voice calling her name. Turning, she saw her best friend, Emily, hurrying toward her, concern etched on her face. "Sarah, I just heard from Tom at the coffee shop," Emily said breathlessly, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Is it true? Did Grayson really fire you?" Sarah nodded, the sting of tears pricking her eyes. "Yeah, he did, for giving a free haircut to a veteran." "Unbelievable." Emily's outrage was palpable, her eyes flashing. "You were doing something kind, and he punishes you for it? What a jerk!" They stood together on the sidewalk, surrounded by the muted bustle of the town. Emily's presence was a balm to Sarah's wounded spirit, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. But the path ahead remained daunting, a maze of uncertainty and fear. "What are you going to do now?" Emily asked gently, her voice laced with worry. "I honestly don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel lost, Em. I've worked there for so long, and now—" Emily placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You'll figure it out. You always do. And you've got me, and the rest of the town, it seems, on your side." The warmth of her friend's support seeped into Sarah's bones, momentarily dispelling the chill of despair. Together, they continued down the street, the comfort of companionship making the burden a little lighter. As they walked, Sarah couldn't help but think about the veteran. His gratitude had been genuine, and the joy she'd seen in his eyes as he left the shop had been enough to make the risk seem worthwhile. It was a stark contrast to the cold dismissal she had received. By the time she reached her small, cozy apartment, Sarah felt emotionally spent. She set her belongings down on the worn kitchen table, the silence of the space amplifying her thoughts. The walls seemed to close in, filled with the echoes of her uncertain future. She sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands, the reality of her situation pressing down on her. How had everything spiraled so quickly? One moment of compassion had upended her entire world, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. Just as she felt the weight of tears threatening to fall, her phone buzzed on the table. It was her mother, her name a comforting presence on the screen. With a shaky breath, Sarah answered, her voice wavering. "Mom." "Oh, sweetheart," her mother's voice was a balm, soothing and full of love. "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I don't know," Sarah confessed, her voice cracking. It all happened so fast." Her mother listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and understanding. "You did the right thing, Sarah. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing." Sarah nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. I wish it didn't cost me my job." "I know, honey, but remember, you've got a good heart, and that's something no one can take away from you." As they talked, Sarah felt a sense of calm wash over her. Her mother's confidence in her steadied her, like a lighthouse guiding her through the storm. By the time they hung up, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She couldn't let this setback define her. She had to stand by her principles, even if it meant facing uncertainty. With her spirits lifted, she began to consider her options. Perhaps she could find work at another salon, or maybe even start something on her own, as daunting as that seemed. The idea of creating a space where kindness and community were paramount appealed to her deeply, a small flame of inspiration igniting within her. As she pondered her next steps, a faint smile tugged at her lips. Her mother was right. She had done the right thing, and she wouldn't let fear dictate her future. She was stronger than this moment, and she would prove it, one step at a time. Lost in thought, she almost missed the sound of a car pulling up outside. Curious, she peered out the window, her eyes widening at the sight of the sleek vehicle parked in front of her building. The figure emerging from the car was one she recognized from countless news articles and interviews, a famous philanthropist known for his unwavering support of veterans. Her heart skipped a beat, disbelief and curiosity mingling in her chest. What could he possibly want with her? As he approached her door, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation building, a feeling that perhaps her story was only just beginning. As Sarah trudged through the biting wind, her mind buzzed with conflicting emotions. The sting of Mr. Grayson's harsh words echoed in her ears, mingling with the vivid memory of the veteran's grateful smile. She clutched her coat tighter around her, trying to shield herself from the cold and the creeping tendrils of doubt. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her actions and their consequences pressed down on her very soul. Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar trill of her phone. Startled, she fished it out of her pocket, her fingers numb from the chill. The screen displayed her mother's name, a beacon of warmth and familiarity. With a deep breath, she answered the call, hoping for solace in her mother's voice. "Sarah, darling," her mother's voice came through, gentle yet infused with an unmistakable pride. "I heard what happened. Are you all right?" Tears pricked at the corners of Sarah's eyes, not from sorrow, but from the relief that came with knowing she wasn't alone. I don't know, Mom. I just wanted to help. It felt right, but now I'm not so sure," she confessed, her voice wavering. "Oh, sweetheart," her mother replied softly, a soothing balm to Sarah's frayed nerves. "You did what your heart told you to do. That's never wrong. Remember what I always used to say? Kindness is never wasted. Sarah managed a small smile, recalling her mother's teachings throughout her childhood. Lessons learned by watching her mother care for those in need, offering a smile or a comforting word even in the busiest of days. I just wish Mr. Grayson understood that, Sarah sighed, frustration seeping into her voice. There are always those who won't see beyond their own rules and profits, her mother said, her tone firm yet understanding. But you have a gift, Sarah. You have the power to make people feel seen and valued. That's something no one can take from you. As her mother's words resonated with her, Sarah felt the fog of doubt begin to lift. She realized that while she had lost her job, she hadn't lost the essence of who she was. Her kindness, her empathy, and her ability to connect with others were intrinsic parts of her identity, unaffected by Mr. Grayson's dismissal. "Thanks, Mom. I needed to hear that," Sarah replied, a newfound determination infusing her voice. "I may have lost my job, but I haven't lost my purpose." Her mother chuckled softly. "That's the spirit, my girl. And remember, you've got a whole town watching. Your actions have already made a difference." Sarah nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her. The knowledge that her simple act of kindness had touched more lives than she initially realized was empowering. It strengthened her resolve to stand firm in her beliefs, to continue spreading compassion, even if the path was fraught with obstacles. As the call ended, Sarah stood for a moment, her heart lighter despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. She glanced around at the familiar streets of her small town, the people bustling about, some casting curious glances her way, others offering smiles of support. She felt a shift within her, a transition from fear to courage, from confusion to clarity. With renewed purpose, she began to envision possibilities she hadn't considered before. Perhaps there was a way to continue her work, to create a space where kindness was the rule, not the exception. A place where people like the veteran could find dignity and care without worry or judgment. As she turned the corner towards her home, Sarah knew that the path forward was hers to carve. She walked with her head held high, ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in the knowledge that she was not alone and that her actions, however small, had the power to inspire change. Sarah stood at the window of her modest home, her mind a tempest of thoughts and emotions. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to such upheaval in her life. Her heart ached at the unfairness of it all, but as she replayed her mother's encouraging words in her mind, a newfound resolve began to take root within her. Suddenly, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway pulled her from her reverie. She peered out, her breath catching as a sleek, black car came to a halt outside her home. Confused and curious, she watched as the driver stepped out and opened the passenger door. Her eyes widened in disbelief as a tall, distinguished man emerged, his presence commanding yet warm. He was instantly recognizable, James Bennett, the renowned philanthropist known for his tireless advocacy for veterans and his humanitarian efforts across the globe. His name had graced headlines and inspired countless initiatives, and now here he was, standing on her front lawn. Sarah's heart raced as she opened the door, her mind grappling with the surreal moment. James approached her with a kind smile, his eyes reflecting genuine warmth and a hint of admiration. "Sarah Lawson?" he asked, his voice calm and reassuring. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's me." James extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling the strength and sincerity in his grip. "I've heard about what happened," he said, his tone earnest. "Your act of kindness touched me deeply, and I wanted to come here personally to offer my support." Sarah blinked, struggling to process his words. "I don't know what to say." "Thank you," she managed, a mix of gratitude and disbelief in her voice. James chuckled softly. "No need to thank me. You did something remarkable, and it's only right that it doesn't go unnoticed. I believe your story can inspire others to prioritize compassion over rigid rules." He gestured towards the car. "If you're willing, I'd like to help you amplify your message. I've organized a rally in your honor, and I believe it could be a powerful platform for change." Sarah hesitated, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. The idea of standing before a crowd, sharing her story, was daunting. Yet the notion of using her experience to advocate for kindness and empathy resonated deeply within her. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I'd be honored. she said, her voice steady with newfound determination. James smiled approvingly. Wonderful. The rally is set for this evening in the town square. I think you'll find the community is more supportive than you might have imagined. As Sarah gathered her thoughts and prepared for the evening, she felt a sense of purpose igniting within her, a feeling that her actions could indeed spark a broader movement. Later, as dusk settled over the town, Sarah and James arrived at the town square. A crowd had already begun to gather, their faces a tapestry of curiosity, support, and solidarity. Banners adorned with messages of kindness and unity fluttered in the gentle breeze, and a stage stood ready, illuminated by soft, welcoming lights. Sarah's heart swelled with emotion as she stepped onto the stage, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Her mother stood in the front row, her eyes shining with pride, while familiar faces from the community nodded encouragement. James took the microphone first, his voice resonant and filled with conviction. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his words carrying over the crowd with ease. "We're here today because of one woman's simple yet profound act of kindness. Sarah Lawson reminded us all that true humanity lies in our ability to care for one another, even when it's not convenient." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Sarah's story is a testament to the power of compassion, and it's a call to action for us all. Let's come together to create a world where kindness is valued above all else. The crowd erupted into applause, a wave of support washing over Sarah, buoying her spirits. As James handed her the microphone, she took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you for being here and for believing in the power of compassion. I never expected my actions to lead to this moment, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my story with all of you." She paused, glancing at the faces before her, each one attentive and receptive. "I gave that veteran a haircut because it was the right thing to do. He served our country, and it was the least I could do to show my appreciation. But what I realized is that kindness should never be a transaction. It should be a way of life." The crowd murmured in agreement, their collective presence a testament to the truth of her words. "I stand here today because I believe we can create a community, a world, where no one feels alone or uncared for," Sarah continued, her passion growing with each word. "Let's make compassion the rule, not the exception. Let's support each other and lift each other up." The applause that followed was thunderous, a symphony of shared hope and determination. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the strength of the community's response. As the rally continued, stories were shared, voices were raised, and a movement began to take shape. People from all walks of life came forward, pledging their support and sharing their own experiences of kindness and resilience. James approached Sarah, his expression one of pride and respect. "You've started something special here," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "This is just the beginning." Sarah nodded, her heart full. "Thank you for believing in me," she replied, her gratitude genuine and profound. As the evening drew to a close, Sarah knew that she had found her path. The rally had not only given her voice a platform, but it had also ignited a flame of change that would continue to burn brightly in the hearts of those who had gathered. And as she looked around, surrounded by a community united by kindness, Sarah realized that this was more than just a moment. It was a movement, one that she was proud to lead. The rally was a sight to behold, a vibrant tapestry of humanity gathered beneath the golden afternoon sun. Flags fluttered gently in the breeze, and the air buzzed with a sense of purpose and solidarity. People of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life filled the town square, their faces alight with hope and determination. As Sarah stood on the makeshift stage, flanked by the philanthropist who had offered his support, she felt a swell of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of community. The speeches that day were heartfelt and resonant. Veterans shared their stories of courage and sacrifice. Townsfolk spoke of the need for compassion and understanding, and the philanthropist eloquently underscored the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it isn't easy. As Sarah took the microphone, the crowd quieted, their expectant eyes fixed on her. She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling over her. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady and clear, "for standing here today, for believing in the power of kindness. This all started with a simple haircut, a small gesture that meant the world to one man. But it has grown into something so much bigger, something that touches each of us. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and choosing to act from a place of love, even when faced with opposition. Her words echoed through the square, met with a wave of applause and cheers. As she continued, Sarah felt a newfound strength coursing through her veins, a strength born from knowing she was not alone. The rally had not only given her a platform to share her story, but also a renewed sense of purpose. It was clear that her actions had sparked a movement, one that sought to challenge the status quo and champion empathy over rigid rules. In the days that followed, the rally's impact rippled through the community and beyond. Local news outlets picked up the story, highlighting Sarah's bravery and the broader message of compassion it conveyed. Social media teemed with support as people from across the country shared her story and voiced their admiration. The pressure on Mr. Grayson mounted, the tide of public opinion forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. Eventually, Mr. Grayson approached Sarah, his demeanor contrite and subdued. "Sarah," he began, his voice tinged with regret, "I realize now that I was wrong. What you did was commendable, and I let my focus on the bottom line cloud my judgment. I want to apologize and offer you your job back." Sarah listened, weighing his words. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine desire to make amends, but she had already made up her mind. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," she replied, her tone gentle yet firm. "I appreciate your apology, but I've decided to take a different path. I've realized that my true calling is to create a space where kindness is the rule, not the exception." With the support of the philanthropist and other members of the community, Sarah set out to establish her own barbershop, a place where anyone in need could receive a free haircut, no questions asked. The shop, aptly named the Kind Cut, quickly became a symbol of hope and resilience. Donations poured in, and volunteers from all walks of life offered their services, eager to be part of something meaningful. The grand opening of the Kind Cut was a day to remember. The shop was adorned with cheerful banners and colorful balloons, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with the crisp autumn air. Friends, family, and supporters gathered to celebrate, their faces shining with joy and anticipation. As Sarah cut the ceremonial ribbon, a sense of fulfillment washed over her, a deep knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Inside, the shop buzzed with activity. Laughter and lively conversation filled the space, a constant hum of warmth and camaraderie. Veterans and other community members sat in the barber chairs, chatting amiably with the stylists who worked with skill and care. The walls were lined with photographs and stories, tributes to the lives that had been touched by Sarah's generosity. As the day wore on, Sarah found a moment to step back and take it all in. She watched as a young girl, her hair freshly trimmed, skipped out the door hand in hand with her mother. She saw an elderly man lean back in his chair, a contented smile on his face as a stylist expertly wielded the clippers. Each interaction, each gesture of kindness was a testament to the power of compassion, a reminder that even the smallest acts could ripple outwards, creating waves of change. "Sarah," a familiar voice called, drawing her attention. It was her mother, her eyes brimming with pride and love. "You did it," she said, wrapping Sarah in a warm embrace. "You turned a difficult situation into something truly beautiful." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, grateful for her mother's unwavering support and guidance. "You taught me the importance of kindness, and it's something I carry with me every day." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the bustling shop, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced adversity and emerged stronger, her spirit unbroken and her resolve firmer than ever. The Kind Cut was more than just a barbershop. It was a testament to the power of community, a beacon of hope that shone brightly in the hearts of all who entered. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah's shop continued to thrive, becoming a beloved fixture in the town and a source of inspiration far beyond its borders. And as she welcomed each new customer with a smile, Sarah knew that her journey was just beginning, a journey fueled by compassion, courage, and the unwavering belief that kindness could change the world.